When I first arrived in England, I had never felt more alone. I was 21, fresh from a small town in Argentina, and had taken a job as an au pair for the Parker family in a quiet, upscale village outside of London. Their house was enormous, far too big for just 3 people, and had that kind of eerie stillness that made my footsteps sound too loud. Mr. Parker traveled frequently for work, leaving me alone with Mrs. Parker and their son, Oliver. He was 10 years old, and at first, he seemed like any other child, quiet, polite, a little spoiled. But the more time I spent with him, the more I noticed things that didn't sit right. It started small. One morning, I found my toothbrush wet before I had even used it. Another time, my suitcase, neatly packed in the corner of my room, was slightly unzipped. I dismissed these things, telling myself I was imagining them. But then, the notes started appearing, slipped under my door at night. Some were simple. I see you. Don't look in the mirror after midnight. Close your closet before you sleep. Others were more unsettling. I like the way you breathe. One night, I finally confronted Oliver. I showed him the notes, expecting him to deny it or maybe even laugh. But instead, he just stared at me with those 2 dark eyes and said, "They're not from me." I felt something cold ripple through me. Mrs. Parker dismissed it when I told her. "You're just tired," she said, brushing my concern away. Oliver wouldn't do that. That night, I bolted my door shut. But it didn't stop. The notes became more disturbing, always waiting for me when I woke up. "Don't scream. It doesn't like noise. Why do you keep locking the door?" Then, I started waking up at exactly 3:12 a.m. every night. No matter what time I went to sleep, my eyes would snap open to complete darkness. And I wasn't alone. At first, I thought it was just the shadows, a trick of my tired mind. But then, I started hearing it breathing. Slow, raspy, too close to my ear. And the worst part? I couldn't move. It was as if something heavy was pressing against my chest, pinning me to the bed. The door was always still locked. But I wasn't safe. One night, as I lay there, paralyzed, I saw the silhouette standing at the foot of my bed. Too tall to be Oliver. Too thin to be human. The moment I was able to move, I turned on the light. The room was empty, but there was a note on my pillow. Almost time. I was done. I decided to quit the next morning, but before I could, Oliver came to me. He looked pale, his small hands trembling as he gripped mine. "I didn't mean to let it out," he whispered. "I thought it was just a game. I didn't want to know what he meant. I just wanted out." I told Mrs. Parker I was leaving, and she didn't even try to stop me. In fact, she just sighed. "They never stay long," she murmured. As I packed my bags, I found one last note. "You can leave, but it will follow." I didn't sleep for weeks after that. Even now, years later, I still wake up at 3:12 a.m. And sometimes, I swear I hear it breathing. Story 2. I still wake up gasping for breath. Even now, years later, the memory of that house clings to me like a second skin. I should have left sooner. I should have listened to my instincts the moment I set foot in that place. But I was young, desperate, and foolishly eager to prove I could handle anything. The Mathis family lived in an old, sprawling estate in the countryside of northern Scotland. The house sat on a lonely stretch of land, framed by a thick, uninviting forest. It was the kind of place that seemed frozen in time, ornate chandeliers that never quite lit up the shadows, antique furniture that smelled of dust and something else I couldn't name, hallways that stretched too long when I walked them at night. I had come to take care of their daughter, Eleanor. She was 6 years old, delicate, with wispy blonde hair and wide green eyes that always seemed too vacant, as if she were listening to something I couldn't hear. At first, I chalked up her odd behavior to shyness. She rarely spoke and never made eye contact, her gaze always drawn to the ceiling or the dark corners of the room. She had a habit of leaving her toys in strange places, stacked in unsettling little pyramids, or lined up perfectly along the edge of my bed. One night, as I was tucking her in, she finally spoke. "You shouldn't sleep with your door open." I smiled. "Why not?" She blinked slowly. "Because he doesn't like to be seen." I felt something cold crawl up my spine. I tried to laugh it off, brushing her hair away from her face. "Who doesn't like to be seen?" She turned her head toward the closet. I followed her gaze, but there was nothing, just the dark crack where the door didn't fully close. That night, I locked my door. The scratching started around midnight. At first, I thought it was a mouse. A slow, deliberate sound, like nails dragging against wood. It came from the other side of the room, from the closet. I told myself it was my imagination. I buried my face in my pillow and forced myself to sleep. The next morning, the closet door was open. I was certain I had closed it. Over the next few nights, the scratching continued, sometimes soft, sometimes frantic, always just before 3 a.m. One night, I decided to push the dresser in front of the closet, thinking that would put an end to it. At 3:08 a.m., I woke to the sound of something heavy scraping across the floor. The dresser had moved. Eleanor was waiting for me at breakfast the next morning, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. She tilted her head as I walked in, watching me with those pale, empty eyes. "Did you see him?" she asked softly. I tried to keep my voice even. "Who?" Her lips parted into a slow smile. "The man in your closet." I didn't respond. I couldn't. That night, I decided I needed proof. If I was losing my mind, I had to know. I set up my phone on my nightstand, angled toward the closet, and left the light on. At exactly 3:12 a.m., I woke up with a start, my skin prickling with the unmistakable feeling of being watched. The scratching had stopped. The closet door was open. My phone was face down on the floor. With shaking hands, I picked it up and pressed play. The footage showed me sleeping soundly, the minutes passing in eerie silence. Then, at 3:11, the closet door creaked open, slowly, deliberately. A sliver of darkness yawned into my room. And then, movement. Something crawled out. Not walked. Crawled. A hunched, skeletal figure pulling itself forward on elongated arms. Its face, or what should have been a face, was a hollow expanse of nothingness, just smooth, pale skin stretching where eyes and a mouth should have been. It stopped at the edge of my bed, watching me. Then, just as slowly, it turned toward the camera. The video ended. I left that night. I ran, leaving my things behind, my mind racing with one singular, paralyzing thought. Eleanor had never been talking about an imaginary friend. She had been warning me. Story 3. It took me a long time to tell this story. Even now, I hesitate because it doesn't feel entirely real. But the scars on my arms say otherwise. I was 22 when I moved to Denmark as an au pair for the Vestergaard family. Their house was a modern, glass and steel structure in a quiet, forested town about an hour from Copenhagen. The isolation didn't bother me at first. I liked the quiet. I liked the space. I should have known better. They had 2 children, Freja, who was 7, and Emil, who had just turned 5. Both were polite, well-behaved, almost too perfect. Something about them unnerved me, though I couldn't put my finger on why. They never fought, never cried, never even threw tantrums. Most kids have that wild unpredictability to them, but Freja and Emil moved through the house like ghosts, soft-footed and too quiet. It wasn't until the first night that I realized something was wrong. I woke up sometime past midnight, my throat dry, the house silent. I was about to get up for a glass of water when I noticed it. My door was open. I was sure I had closed it. Then, as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw them. Freja and Emil stood in the hallway, motionless, just watching me. A small, sleepy laugh left me. "Did you have a bad dream?" Neither of them spoke. I sat up, uneasy. "Do you need something?" Freja tilted her head. "We just wanted to see if you were asleep." My skin prickled. "Go back to bed," I whispered. They did, silently. The next morning, when I asked them about it, they both denied ever coming into my room. I let it go, but it kept happening. Every night, I'd wake up to find them standing there in the dark, just beyond my doorway. Some nights, it was only one of them. Other nights, both. And every time, I asked them what they were doing. The answer was always the same. "We just wanted to see if you were asleep." After a week, I went to their mother, Lena, about it. She just smiled as if I had said something funny. "They sleep soundly all night," she said. "They don't sleepwalk, if that's what you mean." I wanted to believe her, but something wasn't right. One evening, as I was cleaning up the children's playroom, I found a notebook beneath the couch. I opened it, expecting to see scribbles or drawings. Instead, I found pages filled with shaky, childlike handwriting. "She is nice. We like her. She will stay. She is like the others. She will be the last one." I felt sick. I flipped through more pages, my heart pounding. There were lists, names, crossed out one by one. None of them were familiar. And then, on the last page, written in uneven letters, "Don't let her leave." I ran straight to my room and started packing. I didn't care about being polite. I didn't care about what explanation they would demand. I just wanted out. But when I turned around, Freja was standing in the doorway. "You shouldn't go," she whispered. Something about the way she said it made my stomach drop. I pushed past her, But as I reached the stairs, Emil stood at the bottom, staring up at me. "Please don't go," he said. "It will be angry." I froze. A deep, guttural creak echoed from behind me. The house, once so still, now felt alive. The walls groaned, the floors shuddered beneath my feet. I turned back toward my room just in time to see it. A shape, crawling from the shadows. Long, emaciated limbs, its head tilting unnaturally as it emerged from the hallway. It was faceless, skin stretched too tight over an elongated skull, fingers twitching as it reached forward. And then I realized. The children weren't watching me at night. They were making sure it didn't. I ran. I don't remember how I got out, only that I ran until I couldn't breathe. The cold air burned my lungs, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I never went back. I still don't know what was in that house, what Freja and Emil were so afraid of. But I do know one thing. I wasn't supposed to leave. Story 4. I was never supposed to take the job. Something in me had hesitated when I first read the listing. Au pair needed for immediate hire. Large estate. 1 child. Must be comfortable in isolated environments. It sounded almost desperate. But I needed work, and when I spoke to the mother, she seemed warm, if a little tired. "It's just me and Gabriel now," she had said over the phone. "My husband passed away last year. It's been difficult for him." I didn't ask how. A week later, I arrived at the Hawthorne Estate, a towering Victorian home nestled deep in the Welsh countryside. It was beautiful but suffocatingly quiet, the kind of house that swallowed sound. I met Gabriel, a pale, wiry child of 8 who barely spoke above a whisper. His mother, Eleanor, explained that he had always been sensitive, prone to long silences and staring spells. That was my first warning. The second came that night. I woke up abruptly, unsure why. My room was steeped in darkness, the heavy curtains blocking out any moonlight. The silence felt wrong, like something was missing. And then I realized. I couldn't hear the wind anymore. The house had groaned all evening under the weight of an incoming storm. But now, nothing. Just an absence. A void. Then, a soft, rhythmic tapping. I turned my head, my breath catching. The closet door, slightly ajar when I had gone to bed, was open just an inch wider now. The tapping was coming from inside. I sat up slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Gabriel," I whispered. Silence. Then, the door creaked, moving another inch. I forced myself to move, flipping on the bedside lamp in one frantic motion. The glow cut through the dark, revealing the empty space beyond the closet door. Nothing. No one. Just my own reflection in the mirror. My mind told me I was imagining things, but my body knew better. The next morning, I found Gabriel sitting in the library, his small hands folded in his lap. "Did you come into my room last night?" I asked carefully. He didn't look up. "You shouldn't leave your closet open," he murmured. A chill ran through me. "Why?" He hesitated, his fingers tightening against his sleeve. "It lets him listen." The way he said it, so calm, so certain, sent ice crawling up my spine. That night, I locked the closet. At 3:07 a.m., the tapping returned. Soft at first, then harder, more urgent. I lay frozen in bed, my fingers gripping the blanket so tightly they ached. And then, the lock clicked. I bolted upright as the door slowly swung open. For a long, breathless moment, nothing moved. The closet was empty. Then, just as I was about to turn away, something shifted. Not in the closet. In the mirror. I watched in horror as my reflection stood up. I hadn't moved. I was still in bed, breathless with terror, but the thing in the mirror had risen to its feet, head tilting at an unnatural angle. And it was smiling. A grin too wide, too sharp. The thing lifted a hand. I didn't. It placed one finger against its lips. Shoo. I scrambled backward, knocking over my lamp in my panic. The light flickered, plunging the room into darkness, and when I turned back, the mirror was empty, but my closet door was wide open. I ran. I don't remember leaving the room, but I do remember Gabriel waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs, his pale face unreadable. "He likes you," he said. I left the next morning. Eleanor didn't ask questions. She just handed me an envelope of cash and shut the door behind me. I still dream about that house, about the thing in the mirror. And sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I swear I hear it. Tapping. Story 5. I should have left the first night, but I was young, desperate, and too stubborn to admit I had made a mistake. The Holland family lived in a vast, ivy-covered manor on the outskirts of a remote English village. I had been hired as an au pair for their daughter, Alice, a quiet 5-year-old with solemn blue eyes and hair so pale it was almost white. The family was polite, if distant, and the house, though elegant, felt wrong. Too many locked doors. Too many spaces that seemed untouched for years. On my first night, I found my bedroom window nailed shut from the outside. That was my first warning. The second came when I met Alice. She barely spoke, but she watched me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. At dinner, she sat stiffly in her chair, her small hands folded neatly in her lap, and finally whispered, "Did they tell you about the others?" The room fell silent. Mr. Holland set down his glass with deliberate care. "That's enough, Alice." She said nothing more. That night, as I lay in bed, I tried to push away the unease settling in my chest. The house groaned around me, ancient wood shifting under the weight of time. Just as I began to drift off, I heard it. A whisper, low and urgent, coming from the wardrobe. I sat up, my pulse hammering. The wardrobe door was closed. Slowly, heart pounding, I slipped out of bed and pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. Then, a slow, deliberate knock. I stumbled backward, gasping. My first instinct was to run, but something stopped me. A voice. Muffled. Weak. "Help me." I fled the room. By morning, I had convinced myself it had been a dream. The stress of a new place, an unfamiliar house. But then I noticed something. The wardrobe was open, and I had locked it. That evening, as I brushed Alice's hair, I finally asked, "Alice, what did you mean about the others?" She didn't answer at first, just stared at the mirror in front of us, watching my reflection instead of her own. Then, softly, "They don't leave." A chill ran through me. "Who?" I whispered. She turned, small fingers gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "You need to go before it takes you to." I tried to ask more, but she only shook her head, her eyes filling with something close to fear. That night, I locked the wardrobe. I pushed the dresser in front of it for good measure. At 3:12 a.m., I woke up. The room was freezing, my breath a visible mist in the darkness. Then, scraping, from inside the wardrobe, a slow, agonizing drag of nails against wood. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the blanket as if it could protect me. My mind screamed at me not to move, not to look, not to acknowledge whatever was there. But the scraping grew louder. And then, the lock clicked. I bolted upright as the wardrobe door burst open, the dresser screeching across the floor as if something impossibly strong had shoved it aside. For a breathless moment, the room was silent. Then, slowly, something stepped out. Not walked. Stepped. Its movements were jerky, wrong. Limbs too long, head tilted at an unnatural angle. The light from the hallway cast its face in shadow, but I saw enough. The thing had no eyes. Just empty, yawning sockets. And it was smiling. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember running. Only the sensation of cold air hitting my face as I stumbled out the front door, barefoot and shaking, running through the endless dark. By the time the Hollands found me at dawn, I was half hysterical, babbling about something in the wardrobe. They didn't ask questions. They just packed my things, handed me an envelope of cash, and sent me away. No one spoke about it. Not then. Not after. And when I looked back at the house one final time, Alice was watching from the window. Not waving. Just staring. And behind her, something moved.